Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to continue our six-part series on the wives of Henry VIII. Today we're looking at wife number 5, Catherine Howard. And Chris, when I was doing research for this episode of the podcast, one thing became crystal clear to me. King Henry VIII did not ever go far to find a wife. He seemed to pick from his court.
Yeah, he would pick from his court, and it's very interesting also that some of these wives were distant relatives of each other in some form or fashion also. And, you know, Ray, I think that this is a really fun series that we've been doing. And it also just talks about the importance of history you didn't know but should, because many people are going to focus on Catherine of Aragon and Jane Seymour and Anne Boleyn. And really after that, they kind of just lose interest and maybe fade away. But wife number 5, King Henry VIII called wife number 5 his rose without a thorn.
Yep.
But Ray, you can tell that King Henry VIII was getting a little old because he wasn't doing his research. He wasn't really investigating like he used to when he would open up the king's chambers and say, "You come on in here and be my wife." He missed the target on this one. And I think this one probably makes him the angriest.
Yeah.
Because he just missed it. And what's fascinating or scary or ugly, I don't know how you want to say it, is that Ray, this one, she was extremely young.
Yeah, she was very young. I mean, he's a middle-aged man by this particular point in time. We've mentioned in our previous episodes, that when he started out, he was, probably a relatively decent-looking guy. By this particular point in his life, he is obese. He is not in very good health. In fact, his health is continuing to decline. During the time they are married, that Catherine Howard and Henry VIII are married, he starts getting more and more in the way of headaches and other aches and pains throughout his body. I've got to think, Chris, that it was related to his just general poor health that he's having during this time. And as he is not feeling well and not doing well, his temperament gets worse and worse as well. So this is a man who is not just simply, looking for another wife. This is a man who is becoming more and more dangerous as time goes on. And unfortunately for Catherine Howard, the young Catherine Howard, who's going to be 20 years old when she meets her end, she's going to find that out the hard way. But interestingly enough, Chris, I think she knew going in the potential danger that awaited her in that marriage. I mean, she had examples of,
Yeah, of course she knew going in, because when she starts spending time at the court, and when we say at the court, the king basically had all of the organization, all of his meetings and his parties and his festivities all took place at what they would call the court. And so, we also have to kind of think through is that you have Catherine, who is a member of a very powerful family in England during this time, which basically means that her daddy is looking to get something out of this as well, and the fact that, if my daughter could just gain the eyes of the king for even just a few moments, there is some influence that might come to me. And I might have some opportunity as well. And I mean, Catherine, she comes from, this very powerful family, the Howard family. Her father was a young son of Thomas Howard, who was a duke. So he had a lot of land. He had a lot of influence. He had a lot of clout, if you will. And also, Ray, Catherine was the first cousin of Anne Boleyn, which was Henry VIII's scandalous second wife. And so when you do say it runs in the family,
yeah.
kind of, it's true when you start looking at Catherine and Anne. She was also the second cousin to his third wife, Jane Seymour. So yes, he doesn't look very far to find his next wife.
Yeah, he keeps it in the court and he keeps it in the family. I mean, I guess that's one way to do it. But when we talk about Catherine Howard, one of the things that she was sort of known for was being someone who loved the niceties of life, maybe, I guess you could say. She was also not known for her carefulness, not known for her, I'm going to use a word here, ready? Prudent. Aren't you impressed?
I'm very.
But she was known to be sort of sort of demanding. She wanted what she wanted and she wanted it when she wanted it. And this sort of lack of self-control, this lack of ability to be fenced in to some degree, I think is ultimately going to be one of the things that's going to bring her down. Her education that she received growing up, wasn't really intellectual education, but she did have a music teacher, Chris, that she liked quite a bit, a gentleman by the name of Henry Mannix, and he is going to be a little older than her, to say the least, but it's going to be him that's going to actually pursue her, despite the significant age difference between the two. Now, Catherine is later going to say that there was nothing, there was no consummation, let's say, between the two of them.
Yeah, she's going to go and basically say that he was the one who kind of took sexual advantage of his position as a music teacher. That you're right that he and she both stopped short of saying that they were intimate together, but they were close, and even to the point where she and the music teacher were caught embracing, I think. And a sad thing happened to Catherine, in which the Dowager Duchess, for anyone who's watched like Downton Abbey or something like that, but this dowager who was responsible for taking care of Catherine caught them in the act, if you will, but she hit Catherine pretty hard and blamed Catherine for a lot of this, even though the Dowager Duchess was ultimately responsible because she had not taken care of Catherine. That happened at the age of 12. And then at the age of 14, she's moved and she begins to have another intimate relationship. This time it does go further. And this time she has a relationship with a man whose name was Francis Derham. And they even have letters and other things that say that they were addressing each other as husband and also wife. And Ray, I just have to include this because in my research, I just found, the English language is beautiful, but the English language during that time is so full of just imagery and descriptions. And one of the comments that was made is that this was from one of Catherine's roommates. She stated that there was, quote, much panting and puffing in the communal bedchamber, and they were forever hanging together by the belly like sparrows. Don't think I've ever heard it quite defined that way.
No. That's a new one. That's a new one. Certainly not William Shakespeare there.
Well, I don't, and I mean, she even, and I think this adds, because it's getting ready to take us to King Henry VIII, but she even will go a step further and say that she knew how to meddle with a man without getting pregnant, which suggests that she was sexually experienced. And honestly, that's the whole point of where we're going with what ultimately happens to the demise of Catherine Howard. So at the age of 12, she is, I think we could possibly even say, sexually abused if you look at it. Catherine's eyes. It was horrible. And then at the age of 14, you see Catherine pretty much moving into this desire to be with not just one man, but with many men. And I don't think that it really becomes an issue until she becomes, familiar with the king. And I mean, people have described Catherine Howard as attractive, but not really beautiful. If you go back to the other episode that we did, we mentioned Hans Holbein, who was the painter who really kind of helped us with before there, Anne of Cleves. But Holbein's painting basically just provides her as being just a nice looking lady. But Ray, things are going to really start picking up as she has the opportunity to go and work in the household of Anne of Cleves.
Yeah, it's in 1540 that she is sent to the court of King Henry VIII to work as the lady of waiting for Anne of Cleves. And of course, if our listeners want to know more about Anne of Cleves, go back to last week's episode, which was episode number 4 in our 6-part series on the Wives of Henry VIII. And we talk extensively there about the relationship between Anne of Cleves and Henry VIII. But it's while she's there, sometime in 1540, that she is noticed by Henry VIII. And you said something earlier, Chris, that I thought was very, very true. And that is that on this one, Henry VIII missed the mark. There was a lot about her he did not obviously know. If she would have gone into that court and he had known all this other stuff, maybe he wouldn't have married her. But there was a lot he did not know. And she goes into the court, Chris, very inexperienced, very inexperienced, very young, not really knowing some of the dangers maybe she was getting herself into. One particular historian I read pointed out that Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, they had been in the court for years. They knew the ropes, so to speak. And even then, you think about Anne Boleyn, look what ended up happening to her, even with her experience. So you have this very young girl who is brought into the court. She catches the eye of King Henry VIII, and things are going to move pretty fast for her. And I don't think she's ready for this at all.
No, and it is a very quick turnaround, especially after the events of Anne of Cleves, and you have him saying, "Okay, it's going to be Catherine. That's who I'm going with." And they married. It's interesting that he marries Catherine on the same day that what I would say would be his best friend, his very powerful minister, Thomas Cromwell, was executed. And I think, if I do a little Monday morning quarterbacking, that Henry VIII was so grieved by what had happened with Thomas Cromwell. He basically was given the blame for setting up Henry VIII with Anne of Cleves, and Henry VIII got upset, and so he killed Thomas Cromwell. But as we've talked about in the past, we think that he really thought that was a mistake. He mourned the loss of his best friend. So what do you do to take away the pain or take away the thought of that? Is you get married, on the same day, so you don't have to think about that. And he gets married, and next thing you know, she is known as Queen Catherine, and she will develop a motto that basically is "No other will but his." That will be her motto, and it's very clear that the king is very, very attracted to Catherine, especially since Anne of Cleves and that whole situation. And he spends a lot of time with her. He cannot treat her well enough. He caresses her more than he did the others. He is hanging all over her, and I think he finally thinks, okay, I'm back on. I've got somebody now. Things are going to be going well. But Catherine doesn't really fit in because she's so young. I mean, my gosh, she is the stepmother to Mary. but Mary is much older than the stepmother. That's a huge thing. And so Mary is disrespectful. And I mean, I'm not going to say rightfully so, but you can kind of understand where Mary's coming from with this. Mary, one of the daughters of King Henry VIII. So, you have previous that the king has been marrying for an heir to the throne. That was why King was marrying. He wanted an heir. He wanted an heir, not just, that male heir. But now, since he's got that male heir, his focus is, I think, more on companionship and being with someone that he loves, but also being someone that is only his.
Yeah. And that's something that she would never be. I mean, we talked earlier about her lack of self-discipline. I'll just say, so that's going to be what's really going to cause a problem. And going back, you mentioned that they were married, and they were in 1540. Like Anna Cleves, though, Catherine Howard was never crowned queen. She was never crowned as Queen of England formally in a ceremony, that kind of thing. And you think maybe now on wife number 5, things haven't really gone so well. Do you think maybe he's playing it safe, maybe thinking, well, let's just sort of see how this goes before we get too ahead of ourselves here? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. But, I also think, age is kind of getting to Henry VIII. We've mentioned that he had some injuries. He had some other things going on. He's had a lot of loss. But I'm not going to say, woe is me, King Henry VIII. I mean, the man knew what he was doing. I think he was very deliberate in it. I honestly think that where this really falls apart is that King Henry VIII is upstaged through just what would you say, a teenager, right? A teenage.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
I mean, because she flouts the behavior that is expected of a queen, but she doesn't sit idly by. She is very demonstrative in pardoning prisoners. She works in the court. She is active. She is engaged. She's doing what we kind of see a first wife in the United States do. They take on projects and they go and they work for it. And I think she's getting in the role. And then Ray, something happens. She receives notice one day that she has a visitor, and he welcomes the visitor in, and lo and behold, it's her former lover, Francis Derham, from way back when. And he arrives at court. And as he arrives at court, Ray, guess what Francis wants? Francis wants a position at the court. Francis wants a job because his former lover is now queen, and he knows that he can get a lot of things. And so he goes to her and he pesters her for an office, and she has to give it to him. Because if she doesn't, he basically says, I'm going to spill the beans. I'm going to talk about all these things that happened in old King Henry VIII, who, by the way, in case our listeners haven't gotten it yet, fully expected that Catherine Howard had never been with another man, that she was what he would consider a virgin. And so you've got this man showing up who is threatening to unravel all the stories, but then she begins to receive a little bit of favor, if you will, from a man whose name was Thomas Culpeper, who was a member of the King's Party.
Yeah, she makes her former lover secretary. She starts having this affair with Thomas Culpeper. In the meantime, Henry VIII has grown really sick, and she has sort of been moved away, I guess, just in case he died or whatever the case may be. But all the while, all that's going on, she is carrying on this stuff behind Henry VIII's back. And he seems to be in the dark about the whole thing. And I think both Culpeper and the other guy, what was his name? Oh, Durham, Culpeper and Durham. I think both of them were using her to get what they wanted. I don't think there was any love, but for them, for her, they were just using her to get what they wanted because of her position.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that happens, and this is why, once again, I think we both agree that history is so wonderful, because it's not just um, what's the words? It's not just a fact, but there's a lot of looking into things and maybe seeing it in different ways. What gets her in trouble is they find what's known as the Culpeper letter.
Yep.
And in the Culpeper letter, she writes, quote, "It makes my heart die to think I cannot be always in your company." And she signed it, "Yours as long as life endures." A letter that you would have thought would have been written to her husband, King Henry VIII, but it was instead written to the man that she was having an affair with, Culpeper. But here's where the story can turn, because Ray, there are records in history that indicate that this Culpeper guy was a nasty guy, that he was basically a sexual predator, that he had previously been accused of rape and even murder, and had escaped punishment because he was in good friends with the king. And so you have to ask yourself, so is this letter someone who is writing because they truly love this Culpeper and they want to spend the rest of their life with this Culpeper? Or, as unfortunately we see in today's society, people who are victims of domestic abuse or an emotional abuse or sexual abuse, where they don't know how to get out of a situation. And so what they have to do is it's a desperate it's the desperation of a young woman who is trying to placate maybe an aggressive, maybe dangerous person. And maybe he had a threatening control over the queen, and she's trying to appease him, but she can't tell King Henry VIII. So it's very possible, Ray, that we find, Catherine caught in a terrible, terrible situation in which she simply doesn't know where to turn and what to do. Because if she goes to King Henry VIII and she discusses this, I don't know if he believes her, because this guy has been a good friend to the king. And if he doesn't believe her, then maybe he gets mad because she's sleeping with him. So she's in a bad situation.
And the whole thing's going to come to light, so to speak, at least as far as the king's concerned. He's in church one day. He's at mass, and somebody passes him a letter with the accusations of everything that's been going on. And he's initially, Chris, I think he's initially reluctant to believe it. He's sort of like, well, and you got to put yourself in his position here. I mean, he is the most powerful man in England, and I'm sure there were people who were aching to, use their advantage or political power or whatever to bring his wife down or make various political changes. So you can understand his skepticism. But Thomas Culpeper and several others are arrested, and under the threat of torture, he confesses to this relationship with the queen. And of course, this is just going to send Henry VIII into the red zone, absolutely. And he sends her out. He sends Catherine Howard out. And Chris, I did some reading, but it was about the pre-contract and the pre-marriage contract. Because she was not a virgin when they were married, basically, if she had admitted that, and this is just my understanding, it's possible, not guaranteed, that the marriage could have just been dissolved and she could have lived. Now, that's not a guarantee, because Henry was so angry by what he viewed as a betrayal, indeed treason, against the king, that he may have had her executed, period. In fact, in one place I read that he was so mad he wanted to do it himself. Give me the sword, I'll take her out myself. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think what happens here is that he finds out all of the information from all of these other people, but he actually goes to her. And so he just says, all right, hey, this is what I heard. I just need to know, is it true? And she confesses. And not only does she confess, I mean, she confesses that, she was with Francis Derham. She confesses about the situation with the music teacher. And then she confesses about the affair with Thomas Culpeper. And, in that, she is mournful. She is full of sadness and sorrow. And, I mean, all of these things. But Ray, history records that when she confessed all of these things, that Henry, more than any other point in his life, as you mentioned, was plunged into a dark, deep depression, from which he never fully recovered, because he had adored his young wife. He had given her everything. And he was blindsided. He had no idea that this happened. And it is interesting that he is, as you mentioned, he willing to do it himself. But not only is he mad with her, but Ray, he actually has Thomas Culpeper, his friend, and Francis Derham, from a long time ago when she was 14. He convicts both of them on treason and executes them immediately.
Yeah, and Culpeper got the better end of that deal because he was beheaded. And you say, how in the world could you say being beheaded is the better end of a deal? Well, listen to this. Durham is hung, drawn, and disemboweled and castrated while he was still alive.
So we have to ask the question, what's the difference between the two?
That's a very good question. Why the more vicious approach to Derham than Culpeper?
And I think two things go to that. Number one is that we know in records that the 12-year-old abuse that she suffered by the music teacher, there was no intercourse that was there. And it is truly believed that Francis Derham is the first person that she had sexual relations with. And Thomas Culpeper is a known voyeur. He's a known predator. He's been with many, many women. He's friends with the king. So I think what causes Henry to be full of rage is that he really, truly thought she had been with no one but him. And he wanted that first person. And he wanted to exact all of these feelings of rage on that individual. And it's also interesting that another lady is going to be executed in this, and that was Lady Rochford. And Lady Rochford, I believe, was the widow of Anne Boleyn's brother George. And she, I don't think, well, I'm not going to say I don't think knowingly, I think she did know, but she was kind of involved in helping Culpeper and Catherine get together while they were traveling. So she's also executed. And just one final thing I'll say before the execution is that, they send her away. And then when they bring her back to the Tower of London, where Catherine's going to be executed, she passes under the London Bridge. And there's reports that as she was passing under the London Bridge, that she saw the rotting heads of Culpeper and Derham, the two people that she had previously been with.
No subtle message there.
Right.
Yeah, in February 10, she's brought, and this is 1542, she's brought to the Tower of London. And then on the 12th, she is in the evening, is my understanding, is she was told that she was going to be executed the next day. And early in the morning on Monday, February 13, 1542, they come in and they take her to the place of execution. And I think eyewitness reports report she was so frightened, so bothered that she had to be helped up the stairs. But once she gets there, She gives a little speech, and then she had actually practiced, I think, like the night before, laying her head down on the block so she would know how to do it when the actual moment came. And and for her, that moment came very quickly, just like with Culpeper, and unlike Durham, the moment came very quickly, and that she was very quickly beheaded.
Yeah, there's also, and I just want to put this, to rest, because there are some people out there who believe that she stated as she was dying, "I die a queen, but I would rather die the wife of Culpeper." That's not true. There was a series done in TV. I think it was called The Tudors, which kind of goes through the lives of all of these individuals, but that's false. Actually, what she does while she is there is she actually prayed heartily for the king's preservation, and she billed the other people to do so, and she asked for God's mercy. I mean, there was no bitterness, there was no revenge, there was nothing of that. I mean, this was a woman who was so weak, as you mentioned. And remember, she's 18, 19, 20, somewhere around there. She's so young. This was nothing that was easy for her, but this was absolutely terrible that she experienced. And then right after she dies, they bring up Lady Rochford, and she is accused of helping Catherine commit adultery, and she is executed as well. And then both of them will immediately be buried. Interesting place where they're buried, chapel of St. Peter. And if you go there, I believe it's the same place that is it Anne Boleyn's buried? I think also.
I'm not sure.
So, but you can still go today and at the chapel at the Tower of London, and you can pay your respect to Catherine Howard, because her grave is right there.
Yeah, 1542 to 2023. If you go there all these years later, she's still there. So Chris, Catherine Howard's number 5. We got one more to go. Where do you put her when you compare her to Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and Anne of Cleves? Where do you put her?
That's an interesting question. And I think you can look at some of the other ones, and they were looking to get something out of this, but in this situation, this was just two people. I want to make sure I say this right. So if I don't say it right, let's work through it. These were two people who really were not meant to be together, shouldn't have been together. And I think were brought together more for King Henry's sake, to try to change the wrongs that had been done with Anne of Cleves. And I think that Catherine was just gullible. I don't, that might be the wrong word there, but I think she was just innocent, didn't really know better, didn't know what to do, and just kind of thought, oh, I can handle this. And then really found out that she was in a situation that was far beyond anything she would be able to deal with. I don't know if I said that right, but it's just a weird relationship.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would argue that Anne of Cleves was also a marriage that shouldn't have happened. We talked about that in the last episode, where, that one was, Henry himself was unhappy with that one. And now you come to Catherine Howard, and I think he's for a while, very short while, happy. But then, of course, it all falls apart because Catherine Howard, like you said, she's young, she's inexperienced, she's in way over her head, and she doesn't understand, I don't think, the gravity of what could happen if she was caught.
But there's a difference between Anne of Cleves and Catherine Howard. And I think the big difference is, we had a lot of fun talking about Anne of Cleves.
Yeah.
It was just a Tinder date went wrong, should have swiped right. I mean, it does. It has a happy ending, if you will. They recognize this is not for us, and they just moved apart. She
Yep.
goes, hangs out at a palace. She's enjoying life. She's got it made. Everything's good. But in this situation, it's tragic. You have a young lady who could have been full of promise.
Yep.
And I mean, really talk about her whole teenage life from the age of 12 to the end of her life was nothing but harm and hurt and trying to find pleasure or trying to find life in the wrong purposes. And some people who they abused her in so many terrible ways, So I mean, this is just to me, this is like the saddest of all the stories. I mean, I know, I get, of Seymour and Anne Boleyn and Catherine. I get them. But in this one, my heart breaks because this was such a young girl who just got caught up in the king's court, got caught up in the splendor and thought, well, I can make it work.
And she couldn't.
Life.
And she couldn't make it work. And, she would have been better off, obviously, if she had married sooner in her life and thus never been available for Henry VIII to get. And I Chris, before we just leave, I just want to say, at this particular point in history, why would any woman in that court be willing to even give this a second thought, this idea of the king? I guess it just shows the lure of power.
Well, that's right, because what do you get?
Yeah.
If you are willing to be with the queen, the king, you get to be queen. And honestly, let's think about this. And I know we got to end this, but let's think about it also. Here's Catherine, who could have been thinking, hey, if it doesn't work out, I'll just do what Anne of Cleves did.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just retire.
We'll just call it, hey, dude, just didn't work. I'm gonna retire over to the other palace here. And so I mean, I think through that, I mean, the lust for power here. But then again, I mean, you have to ask yourself. I mean, Ray, I mean, there's some people who think she was about 18 when she dies. You have to think, but did she really understand what power was? Did she really? I mean, was that even something that she could even comprehend?
Yeah.
And I then wonder about family, and I wonder about other things that were pushing her into this period of darkness. So for me, where does it rate? I remember the premise of kind of the series was me coming to you after I had seen the Broadway show 6, which does a good job, talking about these different queens. And I went back afterwards, and I was just drawn after looking at all 6 that this one, it really is just the saddest, because it wasn't that she was barren and couldn't have children. It's the fact that she never had the chance to have children. She never had the chance to really have a life. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very, very sad story. 5 down, Chris, 1 to go. I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. Please share this episode with your family and your friends. Give us a like on Spotify. Until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And we will talk to you later.